Welcome to Cheater Confessions. Let's get started with today's story. I still remember that night like it happened yesterday. It was a normal evening in our house, nothing out of the ordinary. My 11-year-old son, Jack, was upstairs finishing his homework, and I was at the dining table with my wife, Rachel. Dinner was on our plates, but it didn't feel like dinner. Rachel barely touched hers, just pushing the food around with her fork. Her eyes stayed low, like she was deep in thought. At first I assumed she was just tired. Maybe work had been stressful, or maybe she was just having an off day. But something felt off. It was in the way she avoided looking at me, the way her lips pressed together like she was holding something back. Finally, I spoke up. "Everything okay?" Rachel froze for a second, then slowly looked up at me. And that's when everything changed. "I think we should try an open marriage." At first, I thought I had misheard her. I blinked, my brain scrambling to process the words that had just left her mouth. "What?" She didn't flinch, didn't even try to soften the blow. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, and said, "I just think maybe we should have more freedom. You know, explore things. It could make our relationship stronger." Stronger. My mind was racing, but at the same time it felt like the world had slowed down. There was no guilt in her voice, no hesitation. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision she had already made. I could have lost it right then. I could have yelled, demanded to know if there was someone else, if I was just the last to find out. But instead, I sat there, staring at the woman I had been married to for 7 years, trying to find the person I once knew. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady. "That's not the marriage I signed up for." I kept my eyes locked on hers. "If you're tired of this, just say it." She didn't waver, didn't look guilty. She just shrugged and said, "I figured you'd say that." Then, just like that, she picked up her plate, walked to the sink, and left me sitting there. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a request. It was a decision. The next morning, Rachel didn't say a word to me. No, "Good morning." No glance in my direction. Nothing. She sat at the kitchen counter, scrolling through her phone, sipping her coffee like I wasn't even in the same room. Usually we'd at least exchange a "have a good day" before leaving for work. But that day? Silence. At work, I caught myself checking my phone out of habit. Normally, she'd text me at some point, asking if I could grab something from the store, a random update about her day, anything. But this time? Nothing. That night at dinner, the distance between us was palpable. She barely acknowledged me. When I tried to talk, she gave me one-word answers without even looking up. "Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah." It was like sitting across from a stranger. And the worst part? She didn't seem to care. At first I thought maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was trying to sort out her own feelings. But I was wrong. The cold shoulder turned into something worse. Rachel stopped pretending altogether. If she wasn't ignoring me, she was being blatantly disrespectful. She'd sit on the couch right next to me, glued to her phone, smiling, giggling, her fingers typing quickly. She wasn't just texting. She was flirting. One night I finally asked, "Who are you talking to?" She barely glanced up before muttering, "No one." No one. Right. Then she started going out more. At first it was just a couple of nights a week. Then it became almost every night. She'd take extra time on her hair and makeup, wearing dresses I hadn't seen her wear in years. Tight, short, designed to get attention. If I asked where she was going, she'd shrug. Out with friends. If I pushed for details, she'd sigh and say, "Why do you care?" before grabbing her purse and slamming the door behind her. And then she stopped coming home at night. The first time I stayed up waiting. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m., then 3 a.m. Still no text, no call, nothing. By the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I finally heard the front door unlock. Rachel strolled in like she hadn't been gone all night, dropped her purse on the counter, and went straight to the bedroom without saying a single word to me. She smelled like alcohol and perfume, but not her perfume. Someone else's. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand an explanation. But I already knew what she'd say. She'd just roll her eyes, laugh in my face, and call me paranoid. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me, I realized something. She wasn't coming back. And worse, she didn't think I'd ever leave. One evening, I was clearing the table after dinner when Jack looked up from his plate. His small voice cut through the silence. "Dad, why doesn't Mom eat with us anymore?" I stopped mid-step, my hands tightening around a plate. I hadn't expected the question, but maybe I should have. How do you explain to an 11-year-old that the woman he sees as family simply doesn't care anymore? That she'd rather be anywhere but here? I forced a smile, reaching out to ruffle his hair. "She's just been busy, buddy." Jack nodded, but his eyes lingered on mine, searching for something. An answer that made sense. He didn't believe me. He knew I was lying. That night after Jack went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the dark screen of the TV. I wasn't even thinking anymore. Just existing, trapped in a house that didn't feel like home. I felt like a ghost. Like I was fading away while Rachel continued living her life as if I didn't matter. She didn't even bother pretending anymore. The final straw came at 2 a.m. I woke up to the soft sound of giggles beside me. At first I was groggy, my mind still caught between sleep and wakefulness. Then I turned my head, and there she was. Rachel, lying next to me, her phone screen glowing in the dark, smiling, laughing softly, texting someone. She looked so happy, so caught up in whatever conversation she was having. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in months, light, engaged, excited. But none of it was for me. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. She didn't notice, or maybe she did and just didn't care. And that was it. That was the moment I knew. She wasn't coming back. She had already checked out of this marriage, already moved on. And worse, she thought I'd just sit here and take it. She thought I'd let her do whatever she wanted while I stayed in the background, waiting. Not anymore. The next morning, while Rachel was still asleep, I sat in the kitchen, staring at my coffee. I wasn't tired anymore. I wasn't confused. The decision had already been made. I just needed to execute it properly. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to leave with a plan. Rachel assumed I would just take it, that I'd keep letting her walk all over me while I stayed quiet, accepting whatever scraps of respect she decided to throw my way. But I was done waiting for an apology that would never come. The first thing I did was start documenting everything. The nights she didn't come home, the way she dismissed me, the texts she hid in plain sight. I wrote down the dates and times, making notes of her actions and the things she said. If she ever tried to twist the story later, I wanted proof that this wasn't just a marriage falling apart. It was her choice to destroy it. Then I took it a step further. Rachel had gotten sloppy. She no longer cared about being discreet. So one night, when she left her phone on the kitchen counter and disappeared into the bathroom, I picked it up. My pulse didn't even spike as I unlocked it. She had never changed the passcode. The screen lit up with messages, flirty texts, plans to meet up, late-night conversations stretching into the early hours of the morning. Names I didn't recognize, men I didn't know. I didn't have to scroll far. The proof was everywhere. She had already moved on long before she ever suggested an open marriage. I took screenshots of everything and sent them to myself. She wasn't going to be able to twist the story when I walked away. The next step was securing my exit. I had been thinking about transferring jobs for a while, but I had always put it off because of Rachel. Now, there was nothing keeping me here. I walked into my boss's office and told him I was ready to take the relocation offer. He barely hesitated before approving it. A fresh start, a new city, a life without Rachel. Then I found a place for Jack and me. It wasn't big, but it was perfect. A quiet apartment in a new city, far enough that Rachel wouldn't be able to just show up unannounced, but close enough that Jack wouldn't feel like I had uprooted his entire world. Everything was set. Now I just had to wait for the right moment. Rachel, of course, didn't notice anything. She was too busy spiraling deeper into her own selfishness. If she wasn't ignoring me, she was treating me like I was an inconvenience, someone she had already mentally erased from her life. And Jack? She barely even looked at him anymore. She was so focused on chasing the life she thought she deserved that she didn't see the way he looked at her. The confusion in his eyes, the hurt, the realization that she had changed. That was when I knew. It was time to go. The morning we left, Rachel was still asleep. She always slept in late, taking her time before rolling out of bed. That was why I had planned it this way, so she wouldn't be awake to try and stop me. Not that she would have, but I wasn't giving her the chance. I had packed everything the night before: my clothes, Jack's clothes, the important documents, the essentials. I had been careful, methodical, making sure to take what mattered without leaving obvious gaps. I wanted her to realize it slowly, not all at once. Maybe at first she wouldn't think much of the silence. She'd assume I was at work, that Jack was at school, that it was just another day. But then, as she moved through the house, she'd start noticing the little details: the missing clothes, the empty drawers, the space where my toothbrush used to be. She'd go to the closet, expecting my work shirts to be hanging there. But they wouldn't be. She'd check the bathroom and find half the counter empty. The house would feel too quiet. And then she'd walk into the kitchen, reaching for her usual morning coffee, and she'd see it. The envelope sitting right there on the counter. Inside, divorce papers. And on top of them, a small sticky note in my handwriting: "I hope you find the freedom you wanted." By the time she read those words, Jack and I were already gone. I didn't wait for a call. I didn't expect one. And I was right. She never reached out. Not a single text. No voicemail. Not even a half-hearted attempt to ask where I was or how Jack was handling things. She didn't care. At least not about me. The only time I heard from Rachel again was through a lawyer. A formal demand for money. She wanted alimony, half of my assets, compensation for the years of marriage she had invested in. It was almost laughable. She hadn't reached out to check if I was okay. She hadn't even pretended to care about Jack. She just wanted a payout. But I was ready for her. My lawyer presented everything: the late nights, the screenshots, the texts proving she had emotionally checked out long before I ever left. The judge barely had to think about it. Rachel got nothing. She thought she could treat me like I was disposable and still walk away with a reward. She gambled and lost. 2 years had passed since I walked away, and in that time Rachel had become nothing more than a distant memory. I had moved on, not in the sense of being with someone new, but in the way that mattered. I no longer waited for closure. I no longer thought about what went wrong or wondered if she ever regretted her choices. I had accepted that some things simply end, and you don't always get an explanation. Then out of nowhere my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, and for a moment I just stared. Rachel. Her name flashed across the screen like a ghost from another life. A name I hadn't seen or thought about in a long time. My first instinct was to ignore it, let it ring out, and go back to my evening as if nothing had happened. But curiosity got the better of me, and before I could second-guess myself, I answered. "Hello." There was a brief silence before I heard her voice. It was different. Not the confident, dismissive Rachel I had once known. Instead, she sounded uncertain, small, weak. "Ronald." She hesitated, as if saying my name alone took effort. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I just let the words sit between us, waiting to see if she would keep talking or back out. "I was selfish," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I didn't think you'd actually leave." There it was, the realization. Too little, too late. And then she said the words I had been expecting from the moment I answered the call. "I miss you." I exhaled slowly, my voice calm, steady. "Do you miss me? Or do you miss the fact that I loved you even when you didn't deserve it?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She was calling because she missed the version of me that forgave, that tolerated, that stayed. Finally, after what felt like forever, she spoke again, her voice shaking. "Please, Ronald." I closed my eyes, sighing. There was nothing left to say. No anger, no bitterness, just finality. "I hope you heal, Rachel," I said simply. "But I'm not coming back." I hung up. And for the first time in years, I felt free. Thank you for watching.